Greetings, children of the 80s, fellow BBS enthusiasts, aka nerds, Commodore 64 enthusiasts. If you're on this video, hopefully you're wondering, oh my gosh, there's content about CNet 12.0. I created these videos because there was no content out there for an application that I remember quite fondly from the 80s when I ran my own BBS. So as I started to get interested in the topic again, I just started doing some searches out there to see what was out there on CNet 12.0. I could find hardly next to nothing other than a few manuals and a little bit of history of the system itself. No content, no videos, no screenshots, and I really wanted to unlock some memories. Like, for example, the splash screen you see in front of you here, that should unlock some memories if you know this piece of software. But for me, it wasn't just this page, but it was this page. This is the page that really unlocked memories for me. This was the page that what your BBS looked like while it was waiting for a phone call. This is the bar page and shows all the statistics. And so when I started looking for Commodore 64 or CNet content, I started looking and I found an image for CNet. And I said, okay, well, I can load up CNet on inside Vice. And if you don't know about Vice, hit pause here and go learn about Vice before you get started. Vice is a really cool tool for the C64 emulation community. So I started doing some work on CNet, but what I really wanted to do was see if I could resurrect my original BBS. And thankfully I had preserved my floppies and preserved my hardware. It all worked. And so I started on a journey of how to resurrect my BBS and try to dissect all the different diskettes and what's on what floppy and how my 15-year-old brain worked. So what I did was started on that journey, but in that journey I learned a ton about CNet, and CNet was a really cool piece of software because you actually could modify the code. It was very extensible, and that really started when I realized I could open up code and change it. It changed the world for me, and it really set my life on a path to become a software engineer. And so I wanted to unlock those memories and see if I could go back and see some of those things. So when I was about 15 years old, I decided to order CNet. But before we get kind of on that journey, I wanted to give a brief history of CNet. CNet was created by a company called Perspective Software. Versions 9.6 and 10.0. That was in the mid 80s, done by a guy named Ken Pletzer at Perspective. For 11.0, and 11.1a, he contacted Don Gladden and said, hey, create 11.0. Don started working on it and had a house fire and couldn't finish it. He turned it over to Jim Selleck, and Ken Pletzer really pushed to get 11.0 out the door quickly. It wasn't ready. It was full of bugs. So quickly there was an 11.1a version that came out after that, but it was a little bit of a mess, 11.0. 11.1a was really the debugged version of 11.0. So when 12.0 came around, Ken Pletzer again asked Don Gladden to develop it for 1987, and Don brought in a guy named Ray Kelm, and the 87 version of 12.0 was based on version 10, not based on version 11.1a, which is interesting. So they developed that version. It was a little bit notorious, had a few bugs in it, but with that 12.0 version, something called the CSSC was created. That was the CNet Sysop Support Center. Guys like Fred Dart out at Port Commodore, Little John, who created a lot of enhancements. See, Don and Ray had a lot more ideas for what CNet 12.0 could be, but they ended up, because of the P file, how you could extend the BBS with P files. Some of these enhancements were released, like Wall Writer was a Little John enhancement, so was Voting Booth, and it really opened up that community for people to not only fix bugs but to extend the BBS. So there were a lot through the CSSC. There was a lot of text files available to how to fix bugs. If you're experiencing this bug, here's how you change your code. So if you can imagine, you had to go in and actually change your code. So 12.1 started getting developed. It was planned on being released around summer in 1988. Right before the release, Don decided to leave Perspective Software, and he took 12.1 with him. Ken Pletzer, who's still at Perspective, said, you're going to have to change a whole lot of 12.1 if you want to take that with you. So Don did that, and Don uh, moved over and created something called BBS 1.0. And it was Don and it was Ray Kelm, and there were folks like Fred Dart, Little John, and a few other folks that did 1.0 of Image. There was 1.1, which was kind of a disaster according to what I can read, and then they had a 1.2 in late 1989. The cool thing about Image is there was a 2.0, and believe it or not, there was actually a 3.0 released just in the last handful of years. So super cool that Image is still alive and well out there. Um, at the same time, back at Perspective, Ken Pletzer was working on CNet version 128. He scrapped that, started working on the Amiga version. He scrapped that and started working on the IBM version. He handed back the C64 code back to Jim Selleck from 11.0, 11.1a, and Jim Selleck created CNet DS2. So probably somewhere in there, you probably have some knowledge of some of those BBSs, but that's a quick history of what CNET was, but the version that we're going to be talking about and the version that is near and dear to my heart is good old version 12.0. So when you ordered version 12.0, I don't know how I did it, but I must have had my mom write a check and mail it to a company called Perspective Software. Waited a few weeks, and all of a sudden, this appears in my mailbox. And this is a picture of my original manual and my original diskette that I still had after all these years. Serial number 1555. And the manual is actually out there. You can actually find it on PDF form out there. Boy, could they have used some extra help writing that manual, because even a person who's been doing software engineering for 20 years, reading some of those instructions, I'm like, they left a lot of things out, so they could have. But really, if you look at what's out there, Perspective was kind of notorious about pretty bad support. But I'm sure I called them when I broke my BBS, and I have some stories I'll share in later videos as well. Here's uh, a close-up shot of that diskette, plenty dirty from being inserted and taken out 500 times, but yep, serial number 1555, and don't pirate my software. That belongs to me, version 1555. So yeah, really neat to see that after all these years. So what came on this diskette? So let's use a tool called Directory Master. Now, Directory Master is for the C64 scene. It's really a godsend. Hats off to these guys, the Wiz 2006 and this guy named Elwix 2019 and Beyond. These guys, this tool is great. It allows you to open up D64 images, which are your 1541 images, modify them, sort them, copy, and even open up code. You can even open up program files and look at the code. I wish there was a little bit better things in here. I would love it if they had a way to edit this in here and save it back to the disk. Boy, would it make the debugging and coding a whole lot easier. And maybe there's a way to do it, boy, because if you know how to do it an easy way to be able to edit this, I'd love to hear it. So what came on the diskette? So this is what the disk looks like. It's got your boot file. It's got the CN file, which is the CNet file, which quickly introduced the concept of this. It started at line 1000. So the CN file is always in memory. All these different P files, like for example, when you logged on to the uh, credit exchange, for example, all these P files would start at line 1 and end at line 999 because CNet reserved those first 999 lines for any P file that needed to be loaded in memory. So it allowed you to really extend your system. And people wrote P files. I must have hundreds of them, and I'll be showing all of those to you as I resurrect my bulletin board. Um, so you got your boot file, you have your ML file. ML, I'm assuming stands for machine language. It's code you can't see. It's compiled code, probably for performance reasons. But what I remember about the ML file is that you could download upgraded versions of the ML. And I probably have 5 or 6 versions of the ML. Mainly what I remember that doing was giving you more graphics capabilities. So there's a few files here for booting if you have a RAM expansion. And then SU and CF, which are the really, if you look at these files right here, this is what needs to be on the boot disk, nothing else. Everything else can be copied to your disks. So for example, all the P files go on the P file disk. These are all your system files, menus, protos, sys files. These are all your, your login file, your menus, all these sorts of things. So there's a few modifications on this, like this wasn't original. So the person who uploaded this, and thank you by the way, whoever this was, made a few modifications, but I've cleaned it up mainly. And then you have etc., which are all kinds of like data files, like logs and things like that, news files. And then you have a user file and a G file, sorry, user disk and a G file disk. But we'll get more into that when it comes to actually configuring CNet and firing it up. But that's what comes on the CNet disk. So let's go into Vice, and hopefully you know Vice. You certainly know these commands. And I won't do a lot of introduction on Vice. I'm going to assume you have some knowledge in that area because there's a ton of content out there for Vice. So go out there and find some content. So you get your splash screen, and it's going to load up. And this is the first time you're booting up CNet, so it's going to look for a configuration file. It's not going to find it. So it's going to tell you that the system is not configured. The file it's looking for is called bd.data, and that's where you set up all your drives and whatnot. So we'll be doing that in the next video. So if you stuck around this long, awesome. If there's a couple dozen of you out there who are interested in this topic, I'm ecstatic because, like I said, there was no content out there for CNET 12.0, so I'm going to change that. And if a few of you like it, I'm happy. So join me in the next video for that content. And yeah, later, BBS nerds.